Okie dokie. Here we are on this, the fourth day of Advent of Code. All right. Let's get right into it. Gonna check out this puzzle. Okay. So, today, passport processing. So you arrive at the airport only to realize that you grabbed your North Pole credentials instead of your passport. While these documents are extremely similar, the North Pole credentials aren't issued by a country and therefore aren't actually valid documentation for travel in most of the world. It seems like you're not the only one having problems, though. A very long line is formed for the automatic passport scanners, and the delay could upset your travel itinerary. Due to some questionable network security, you realize you might be able to solve both of these problems at the same time. The automatic passport scanners are slow because they're having trouble detecting which passports have all required fields. The expected fields are as follows. Okay, and then here we have a short name for the field, and then we have a little description of what exactly that short name means. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 fields here. Passport data is validated in batch files, which your puzzle input is an example of that. Each passport is represented as a sequence of key value pairs separated by spaces or new lines. Passports are separated by blank lines. And here's an example batch file with 4 passports. All right, and so here we're saying that out of this example, cool. 2 of these are valid, right? So, great. So our goal is, given our puzzle input, we want to count the valid passports that have all required fields. All right, so again today, let's get started. So first things first here, I'm going to copy all of this information, and we're going to set up a new puzzle folder here. All right, so we'll start a new, day 4 folder here. All right, and then in here we can put part 1 dot markdown. All right, and so now, oops, doing all the wrong things. Okay, there we go. And this is our context. These are our examples. The examples end there. Awesome. Okay. All right. And then we have our question, which is count the number of valid passports. All right. So let's start off by setting up those tests. Let's get these tests set up here. All right. So we'll bump out of here, get into Ruby. So we'll go day 4 spec.rb. All right. So what do we got? Oh, why did that happen? Okay. 4 spec.rb. All right. So here we go. So we have our input set up here. So that's our example input, and then we're going to say, we're going to pull that in, and we're going to count how many valid, and then based on our examples, we expect 2 to be there. So I'd forgotten I had already set up this test earlier, pre-starting this stream, and so that's why everything is in there. Cool. So there we have day 4. Those are our tests, and so if we run this, it's going to fail because we haven't actually implemented anything. So let's do that now. So we will start up day 4.rb. Okay. Hopefully I haven't. Let me see. You know what? I think I maybe. Okay. So yeah. So we're gonna call this class passport. There we go. Let's take a look at our spec that we have here. All right. I think I was playing around with some stuff earlier, so I just want to make sure that we actually do this live instead of looking at things that I'd tried to get earlier. So I'm just going to call this day 4s as a little shortcut to make sure I don't actually have a day 4 file lying around somewhere that has spoilers. Okay, so this class is going to be called Passport. Let's see, what do we got? So we're defining a class method that is called import down here. Okay, so let's define that here, and that's going to take our input. And the reason that we're doing that slightly different from some things that we've done previously, and so one of the thoughts that I had here is an individual passport is our class, and then the import is pulling in a file which defines many passports. So as opposed to previous examples in previous days where we've called new on some class with the input, here we're going to do something else, and we're going to have multiple instances of that class instead of just one instance of that class. All right, so we're going to say import gets the input, and then it does something with it. And then we initialize with something else. And so let's take a look. So what we have here are key value pairs, right? So there's a few different thoughts that I have here. One thing that we could do is we could create a bunch of different attributes on our model, on our record here for each of these different things. Or we could just store, whatever. We could parse this out as a hash, and then we could just store that. So that's what I'm going to do to start. So those are our attributes, and that is that. And then we'll make a little reader here. Okay, great. So then, let's see. So what are we importing here, or how are we going to import this? So the first thing we have is the input is, right, so this little bit here, that is one passport. So when we're going through, the first thing we're going to do is we want to break this up into a bunch of individual passports. So we can't do exactly the same thing that we've done in previous days, where generally up till now our input has been one line of the text file is what's interesting to us. That's not true anymore, right? So it might be 2 lines, it might be 4 lines. You know, the number of lines that are broken up onto can vary here. So what else can we split this up by? It seems like there's this blank space here, right? So the way that we could split up by the blank space is we can do input split, and now instead of 1 new line, we got 2 new lines, right? Because one of the new lines is going to be here, and then the next new line is here, and then you have your next entry. So it's 2 new lines this time instead of 1 to split this up. All right. So now we're going through, and what are we going to do? We're going to map over that, and we'll call this a this is a raw passport. So we'll call it something to that effect, right? Okay, so now we've got these 2 lines. So the question becomes, how can we turn this into a hash, where the keys are the keys that we have here, and then the values are the values that we have here, right? So we have keys and values are separated by colons, but in between each different key value pair is separated by a space. And here again, we're going to do something different than what we've done previously, right? So normally when we're splitting up text, we're splitting it up by specific characters. So for example, in here, we're splitting by 2 new lines, right? Now, this depends upon that character always being that character. However, in this case now, we have to split by, it might be a new line, or it might just be a blank space. And so what I could do here is I could split by a regular expression. And for that regular expression, I'm going to use is just any white space character. And that's going to work for both new lines and for actual spaces in between these entries. So we're going to say raw pass. We're going to split this by a regex for a white space character. Okay, and so now what that should give us is each of these key value pairs are an individual item in our array. And so now we're going to go even further. We're going to split further than this, which is we're going to map over these, and we'll call this a pair. And so now what we want to do is we want to split up these pairs in individual values. And so the way that we can do that is we can split by this colon. Okay, there we go. So now the result of this is going to be basically, it's going to be an array of arrays, and inside each of our arrays we're going to have a key and a value. All right, and this has a great sort of property to it of allowing us to very easily transform that into a hash. And in order to show you how we're going to do that, let's open up a new tab here. All right, so we'll start up a Ruby console here, right? So if we have an array, and inside that is more arrays, and each one of those arrays has two items in it, right? So we have a key and a value. Ruby has a very handy toHash method that you can call on an array, and this relies upon you having an array of arrays where the inner arrays have two items in it, and it assumes that the first item in each of these inner arrays is your key and the second item is your value. So you can see here where we've called toHash on this array, it's returned key, key, value, value, right? Okay, so the way that we can use that is we can simply call toH on this part right here. And so now what we should get back is an array of hashes. And each of those hashes is going to have the information for our passport. And so what we can do with that is we can say new, and then we'll use this individual hash in order to initialize a new passport. Okay, and so the result of import, as we saw over here in our test, is that import should return to us an array of passport objects. And then that way we can simply go over we can count the number of passport objects that are valid in that array, and that'll solve our problem for us. So the next thing that we want to define is this valid function, right? So here, let's just say true, right? We're not going to implement this right now. What I want to do is make sure that I have all the methods defined that are necessary in order for my test to actually run, even though I expect those tests to fail. So here we can say rspec day for spec.rb, run that. Okay, so there we go. The error that I'm getting is the error that I expect to get, which is valid is not working properly. So I expect 2 of those passwords to be valid, but it's saying 4. All of them are valid. And so now I can go in and define what does this valid method actually do. All right, and so in order to start to think about that, let's take a look at our example again here. So it says, what are we doing? So the first passport is valid because all 8 fields are present. Cool. Second passport is invalid because it's missing the height field. Okay. And then the third passport is interesting. The only missing field is CID. So it looks like it's a data from a North Pole credentials that we have, not a passport at all. And here it says, surely nobody would mind if you made the system temporarily ignore missing CID fields. Surely. Okay, so our valid method is basically going to say, out of all these fields that we have here, make sure every single one of them is present with the exception of this CID field, this country ID field, which is optional. Okay, so as I start to think about how I'm going to do that, the first thing I'm thinking about doing is I want to have somewhere where I have defined all of the possible fields and then whether or not that field is required, right? So maybe I could do something like I have some constant called fields. That itself is an array, and then in here I'm just going to paste all of these different fields that I got, and then we're going to do some formatting here to make this actually usable in our code. And so the first thing that I'm going to do is that I'm going to call this one name. All right, and we will put that like that. You know what, actually, let's make that a symbol. That's nice. Okay, name, there we go. And then is this required is true. Okay, and then we can do the same thing for the next one. We'll say that's the name. Let's see, surround that, and this one is also required true. There we go. All right, and so this is going to be kind of tedious to do this. You know, it's not so many times, but it'll be a little tedious. And so we're going to take a little segue here to talk about having fun with text editors. So I'm using a Emacs, a variety of Emacs called Spacemacs, which just means it has all the Vim stuff in it. So I think that this feature, sometimes I forget which feature is Emacs, which is Vim. I believe that this is a Vim feature, which is I'm going to record a macro. And what that means is I'm going to record a series of commands that I could replay again and again. And so to do that, I'm going to hit Q over here. Let's see what we got. So Q to start recording a macro. I'm going to call that, let's see. Oh, okay, I see. QA, there we go. So I forgot, you have to name your macro. So it's Q and then whatever, you hit some key and that's the name of the macro, right? So what's my macro going to be? My macro is going to be that I insert a curly brace and then I delete the ending one, make a space. I'm going to surround 3 characters with single quotes, okay? Then I'm going to call the first one name. I'm going to go to the last quote. I'm going to add a comma there. Then I'm going to delete everything else that's on the line. I'm going to set required true. I'm going to finish that off, okay? And then I'm going to say finish recording. So that's my macro, right? So now how do I do that? So I'm going to use that macro there. Boom, awesome. So that's automatically formatted the way that we wanted. So I can do that again here, and I can do that, oops, here, nice, so much easier than actually doing it. So sometimes I didn't do it this time, but if you're very clever, you can write your macro in such a way that you can tell it to run multiple times, and it'll move down to the next line and start itself again. Okay, great. So now the only thing that I need to change here is that the CID field is not actually required, right? So that's required as false. And then just because this is a constant and I don't want anyone to change this, I'm going to freeze it. Also because Rubocop was going to yell at me if I didn't do that. So I'm going to silence Rubocop and have a good practice at the same time. Okay, so now how can I use this definition of fields to check validity? So what I can do is, well, the first thing that I want to do is, really I'm only interested in checking these fields that are absolutely required, right? So let's keep that list of required fields as somewhere separate. So I'm going to define a class method. I'm going to call this required fields. And so what is required fields? Required fields are all of the fields where required is true. So just selecting F where required is true. All right, cool. So that is the method I can use to get my required fields. And so now down here in valid, I could say self class required fields. All of them. I want to make sure that something is true for all of the required fields. And what I want to make sure is true is that if I look into my attributes and I grab the attribute that corresponds with the name of a given field, I want to make sure that's there. And so if it's not there, or if I fail to fetch it, I'm just going to default that to false. So by default, it's gonna, if you use fetch and you don't have any second argument, it's gonna raise an error if it doesn't find it. So we don't want that to happen. So I'm gonna have false as my default here. Okay, great. So I think that this is actually the entire thing. So let's run our tests. Awesome, test pass. Cool. So that was pretty easy. Let's get our puzzle input and see if the tests are a good representative of all of the possible edge cases that could be in there, right? So we have day 4, let's make input.txt, and then let's paste in our puzzle input here. And now we can make a day 4 solution file. So let's do that. Day 4 solution.rb. All right, amazing. Looks like I did this one before also when I was prepping. Okay, so here we go. Just going to change that. All right, let's run this file. Ruby day 4 solution.rb. Okay, 233. So let's see. Is 233 the answer? Submit. Awesome. 1 gold star. On to part 2. Okay, the line is moving more quickly now, but you overhear airport security talking about how passports with invalid data are getting through. That might be your fault. Better add some data validation quick. You can continue to ignore the CID field, but each other field has strict rules about what values are valid for automatic validation. So your birth year must be 4 digits, must be at least 1920, at most 2002. Your issue year, 4 digits, at least 2010, and at most 2020. Expiration year, same thing, at least 2020, at most 2030. So height is a number followed by either CM or IM. Okay, hair color is a pound followed by exactly 6 characters. Looks like it's a hex code. Eye color is exactly one of these values. And then passport is a 9-digit number, including leading zeros. And then again, country ID we don't care about so much. So here we go. This is a pretty common topic as a web developer. Adding data validation to your models is not an uncommon thing to be doing. So let's see. What types of validations are we doing? So one type of validation we have is we're validating a number. And what's funny is, so it says 4 digits, but it says at least 1920. There's no 3-digit number that is greater than 1920. So the number of digits is irrelevant. I can just kind of make sure that it's more than this and less than or equal to that. Like the digits don't really matter. Height is that one's going to be significantly different. Let's do the number one first. Okay, and so how can we do this? So let's go to our file, right? So now here, instead of just having required true, what I'm going to do is I could start to add some rules around what does a valid value look like. And so maybe one way I can do this is I could say must be greater than, actually I think that it is at least. So that's greater than or equal to 1920, less than or equal to is 2002, right? So that'll cover that one. This one, I could say this one is greater than or equal to 2010. And then we have less than or equal to 2020. Change that to a Q, okay, 2020. There we go. Expiration year, same kind of thing going on here. So this one is greater than or equal to 2020. And then less than or equal to 2030. Okay, great. Let's see. Height is slightly different. So height is a number followed by either CM or IM. So if CM, all right. So this one I think we're going to make a little bit more complicated. And let's see how we might do this one. So let's say that it's required. And then we have, so let's think how we're going to do this. So it's a postfix, right? So it's a number and then a unit. So how can we model this? Maybe if we say, so here we're saying like greater than or equal to or less than or equal to, maybe this one has a unit, which is, let's just use that unit as our key, right? So here we could say CM, and then we could say this one is greater than or equal to, what is this? CM must be at least 150, and then less than or equal to 193. And then the other one was inches, and then this one is 5976. So greater than or equal to 59, less than or equal to, what was that number? 76. Okay, cool. So, and now as I'm going through this, I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to parse this format that I'm setting up, or if I'm even going to keep this format, but this is just the kind of the first pass that I'm taking at encoding these requirements into my data structure for the fields. And then when we actually go to validating them, I'll figure out, does this actually work? Do I need to change it? Etc., etc. And so this one, I'm just going to use the term hex, right? So I'm going to, maybe I'll have some sort of formatting requirements that it's a hex code. Because I think that that is a fairly common thing to know about, or what are hex codes, especially if you do web programming. You're going to see hex codes all the time. iColor is it has to be in a list, right? So for this one, I'm just going to simply provide the array of things that it could be. Okay. What else do we have? PID. So this one is a 9-digit number, but in this one, so because we're including leading zeros, the actual digits matter, right? Because if we were including leading zeros up here and we had a digit requirement, then it might matter. But we weren't. We're just looking at the value of it. Here, we're not looking at the value, only digits. So the digits actually matter. So how can I do that? I'm just gonna, do something like digits 9. Okay. So again, I don't really know how I'm going to actually use this kind of ad hoc format that I've come up with here, but we'll figure that out as we go. And so here we're going to change this a little bit, right? It's, one thing that I'm thinking about. So in past days, what we've done is we've made this work for part 1 and part 2. So let's see. How can I do that? Well, mere presence alone, I think, is still going to work, right? So here, the required fields, just because that value isn't false right now, this method should still work for us, okay? And now I'm going to say, let's see. Let's have a presence only flag that defaults to true, right? Because that is basically the first sort of check that we did was simply, is this present or not? Right, so maybe we'll make that our default. And then so we could do here is we could just slightly change some things about what we're doing here. Okay, so in this one, all we did was grab the value. So we can say, this is the val, is that. And then next we could say, if presence only, then what we're going to return is that val that we pulled out, which is what we were doing before. So then otherwise, what we're going to do in this case is we're actually going to use the more complicated validation rules that we have for part 2. And then so let's say validate with rules, and to that we're going to pass the value, and then we're going to pass the rules, which are stored as f required. Okay. And then so let's just go down here real quick I'm going to make a new method called validate with rules. And that takes the value, and then the second argument are the rules. I'm just going to return true for now. And so let's just see, does this, and then I'm just going to say I'm not using these inputs right now. Does this still work for part 1, right? So let's see, our spec day 4. Okay, cool. So we have successfully started to refactor this code in a way it still works for part 1. That's great. Let's go back here. Okay, so now all that we have to define is this validate with rules method here, right? So this takes the value and then it takes rules. So let's take a look at what are the different types of rules that we have. So we have this range of greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. We also have these ones that depend on, you know, it's a combination of a range, but that range only applies to a certain unit. Okay, so let's start out with the range ones. And you know what? What I'm going to do is, just to make my life a little bit easier, I'm going to add another field here, which is, I'm just going to say type range, right? I'm going to do that for all of these. I'm going to say type is range, because the alternative to doing something like this, here I'm just explicitly naming what is the type that this validation rule that this is. If I didn't do that, I would have to look at basically like what are the different parts of the validation rule and then use that to figure out what type it is. That just feels like a lot of work when I can just go ahead and just say, okay, here's what type it is. Here's the name of it. Okay. And so now what this allows me to do also is I can just do a really simple case statement on the type of the rule. So here I could do case rules type, and I could say when it's a range, do this. So I could say validate range value, and then I could say give me the rules, right? And this really is just a single rule. So just to keep that nice, there you go. Validate range value rule. Okay, so what does validate range look like? So we have validate range, and it takes a value and it takes a rule. Okay, and then so in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to say value to I greater than or equal to rule greater than or equal to, and then and value as an integer less than or equal to rule less than or equal to. Okay. So that should take care of validating the range for us there. What other types of validations do I have? Okay, so now I have this one, which is, let's say this is a type, and let's say this is a range per unit, right? Range per unit. Okay, and then I say when range per unit. And we do validate range per unit value rule. Okay, cool. So the first thing that we're going to do for validate range per unit, and then we have the rule, right? So how does validate range per unit? So the first thing that we want to do is take our value and then split it into what's the number and then what is the unit. And so to do that, let's see, we can say, I'm going to use a regex again here, because that's a quick, easy thing that comes to mind. And so here I can say, I'm just going to say match is value match, and what do I want to do in my regex? One thing I want to do, I want to capture every single number is one thing, and then every single word character is going to be, and really, you know what, again, just to be super explicit about this, this is going to be, really it's going to be either C, M, or I, N. So I don't even need the whole range. What I could say is this is either CM or IN. And you know, what's interesting, Not entirely sure. I think that should do it. But I'm not sure if I'm capturing too many things. So once again, I'm going to go to Rubular here, which is a really great thing. So let's say our test string 1, 2, 3 CM, 1, 2, 4, 5, 3 IN. What am I doing? And all the numbers are in one capture. Okay, so that works as I expected. And then over here, it's either CM or IN, and then there's one or more of them. Okay. Oh, right. So I don't need that's what I was doing. I don't need this plus, right? The plus you only need when I'm saying it's one character or more characters. Here it's like it's exactly one of these two characters every time. Okay, so cool. So that's going to work for me. So then I could say, once again here, match could be nil if I've done something wrong or I don't fully understand how the input is formatted. So I'm going to raise failed to parse unit and value from, and then here we'll put our value there. Okay. Otherwise, our unit is match the second part of our match, and the value is the first part of our match. Okay. And so you know what here, I don't like reusing terms because that's confusing. Let's just make it clear. This is a string. It doesn't actually become a unit and a value until later on. Okay, and then here we're gonna change this to I, because now that I have my unit, what I can do is go back up here. So just thinking about how I'm going to use this, it's actually because my unit is a string. When I parse it out, it's going to be easier if I am able to use that as a string here. And so I'm going to change that from a symbol to a string. And so that way what I can do is I can do something like range is rule at unit, right? And then the great part here is my range is formatted exactly like my standard range rule above, so I can actually reuse that logic here. So I could say validate range on the value, and then using that range, that this is essentially a sub rule that's specific to that unit. And so that should be good for that. What is this complaining about? Unreachable code detected. Because I don't have any if statement around my raise. My raise is always going to happen right now. What I actually want to do is only raise if match is nil. So I fix that up. There we go. Now this code is reachable. Everything should work as expected. Okay, so then what else we got? So we got, this one is Hex Code. And so just to sort of make this similar to or formatted in a way that's consistent with the rest of my rules, here I'm just going to have type, right? I don't have any range associated with that. I just have a type. And then sort of anticipating what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to call this as a set type, and then this is the actual set. Okay, cool. And then we're gonna call this one is type is digit count. Right? I don't know. Not a great name, but it's fine. Okay, cool. So we're on to type of hex code. So when hex code, so we could say validate hex code, and then here we just need to pass the value because our hex code requirement here, we don't have any other rules around range or anything like that. So then let's do validate hex code. Okay, and then value, and then so a hex code is what makes a valid hex code. Let's kind of go back to our things here. So we have, it starts with that. So we can say value start with, I think, is the amazingly named Ruby method. Let's see. So we can say that. Start with, I can never remember if it's start with or starts with. Cool, it is start with. So there we go, and then Just sanity check. Awesome. Okay. So it has to start with that, and let's see. It's exactly 6 characters of 0 to 9 or A to F. And so actually what I can do here is use a regex also. But so now in this case, so here we call match without a question mark, and that returns our match data. Here, I'm going to call match with a question mark. And all of this, instead of returning the match data in the event that it matches, it's just going to return true. And then if it doesn't match, instead of returning nil, it'll return false. Because what I'm not capturing anything at this point. All I want to do is make sure that it matches. And then what I'm matching against is a range. It's characters 0 to 9 or A through F. And then it has to be, what does it say? 6 of them, right? Because it's a hex code. And so the way that I can require exactly 6 of something in a regex is by using these little curly braces like that, I think. Let's see. So once again, let's pop back Rubular just to sort of sanity check ourselves here. Let's make sure that this is actually right. So what is our regular expression? Is 0 through 9, A through F, and then in curly brackets a 6, right? Because here we can see exactly 3 of A, right? That's how you could do it. And you can use ranges in here. We're just using a single number, right? So does this match 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Okay, cool. What about if 3 of those things are A's? Okay, great. What if they're F's? All right. What if they're G's? 3, 4, 5, 6. No, it doesn't. Right? So thankfully, regexes know about the alphabet so that I can do A through F is A, B, C, D, E, F. That's it. All right, so that should satisfy validating a hex code, right? Starts with, and then it matches. Oh, and you know what's interesting? So we're using a regex here, so I can actually even skip this little start with bit. I can make that part of my regex, right? So here we have a special little matcher for the very start of the line, and so that I can use, ooh, which one is it? I always have trouble finding that one. Okay, start of line is a hex code, and then the rest of that. And then just to sort of, let's kind of sanity check this here. So 1, 2, 3, and then A, B, C. So this matches. Then I add my rule for it starts with a pound. And let's see if I add a pound. Okay, cool, all matching. Awesome. So that should work for hex codes. What else do we got? Let's see, hex code. Okay, so now we have to validate that it is included within this set. So let's go up here. We'll say when it's a set, then we validate set value, and then we'll pass in this rule. And then let's define this method down here. Def validate set. We have our value, and then we have our rule. And so this one should be pretty straightforward. So this rule has a key set, which is an array, and that array is going to be what we're making sure that our value is inside. So we could say rule set, and then we have this method include value. Okay. And so that is really all that we got to do there. What else do we got? Digit count. So we want to make sure that it has 9 digits. All right. So that's PID. Let's see. So digit count. That's going to be the next thing that we're doing here. All right. So when digit count, validate digit count value rule. Okay, and then how does validate digit count work? It's taking some value in a rule. And so here, once again, what we can do is we can use a regex. So we could say it matches, it must have a digit, and it must have how many of them? Well, what we can do here is we can use, we can interpolate, There we go. Rule digit count, I think it was called, or maybe it was just called count. Oh, it's called digits. Okay. So here we do digits. Okay, so we're going to interpolate the count into our regex there so that it's saying, does it match at least that many digits? But now we want to make sure that there's nothing else in there. So I'm going to say the string starts here at where the digits start and it ends where the digits end. So nothing else can be in there, right? Because otherwise maybe we get some false positives for, yeah, maybe it has the amount of digits it has, but it also has a ton of letters and other stuff in there, which we don't want. Okay, so I think that we have handled all of these different rules that we defined here. Okay. So those should all be handled, all of our different validation rules that we have. So one thing that we have here, so case statement. So as always, one thing that I like to do is I want to make sure that nothing is sort of silently falling through the cracks here. So I'm going to say, if it doesn't match against these things, I'm going to say unknown validation rule, and then I'm going to report what that rule is, which is rule the type field. Okay. Great. So now if I go back to Advent of Code, all right, so this is for part 2. So does it tell us in our examples? All right, so your job is to count the passports where all the required fields are both present and valid according to the above rules. So I don't know how they could be valid and not present, so I'm not going to worry too much about present and valid. Okay, so I see. They've given us some invalid passports and valid passports. All right, so the test case for this is going to be a little bit different than last time. It's not quite as straightforward as just saying, okay, use these same examples and now 2 of them are valid or 3 of them are valid. Now we're actually going to do a sort of a whole different thing. So let's say context is with validation rules. I'm going to sort of set up a different thing here. So the first test is just presence, and now we're going to say with validation rules. What are we going to do here? So let, and then what do we say? So these are invalid, and then we will paste these in here. All right, so we have what are our lines of input. Put that there. Okay. There we go. Awesome. Okay. Let's make this indentation really nice. Cool. All right. Okay, so there's our invalid passports. And so now if let's just make sure, before we do the valid ones, let's make sure it correctly identifies invalid passports. Okay, there we go. So how do we do this? So passports, again, is passport import the invalid ones. Excuse me, invalid. And then what we have is, so we expect passports.count, and here I have to do this a little bit differently because now we have to pass an argument here. So p valid question mark except what is this called? So for what is this? Oh right, okay. Day 4. Presence only is the thing that I decided here. So presence only is false. Okay. Okay. And you know what? Just kind of thinking this through, I don't really like this so much anymore. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to have 2 different methods here. I find this flag is not super helpful. So I'm going to have one is called validate presence, and that is exactly what we were doing in the first one. And so let's just simplify this, clean all this up. Okay, so that's validate presence, and then the next one I'm going to say is what do we say? Validate content, maybe. You know, why not? Content. Dun, dun, dun. Oh, or we're phrasing it as a question. Valid by presence. Valid by content. Or yeah, well, I don't know. These names are not great, but I don't care that much about it at this point. Okay, so here we're just going to do that part. All right. Naming is hard. Okay, so let's see. What do we got? What do we got? What do we got? So if we go back to our tests, okay. So now here where it says valid, this is valid by presence. So let's do by presence. And then here we can say by presence. All right. And then now we don't need this. I'm just going to kind of let's indent that, get rid of that. This context, I'm going to change to a new describe block for valid by content. Okay. And then that way, here I don't need to do this jazz. I can just say expect passports count valid by content to equal, and so my expectation is that every single one of these is invalid because that is all that they gave me. So let's say that is 0 in this case. Okay. What do we got? What do we got? Let's see. Let's run that. Okay. Valid by content is failing. Okay, that's fine. Let's see. So undefined variable method, line 44. Okay, so I just called this val. Let's just change that to value. Okay, so far so good. So it's correctly identifying everything that's invalid. But now let's see. Oh, and I got some indentation adventures here. Okay. So now it's correctly identifying everything that's invalid. Let's add those tests for things that are valid. So here we go. These are all considered valid. And so actually, yeah, let's do this. Let valid do. All right, so this is going to be a lot of the same. There we go. There's our valid. Oops. And this is put inside a here doc, which, you know, if you ever have a desire to be truly confused, go look up all the rules for here docs in Ruby, because you can do some pretty weird stuff that I'm sure there's some reason for it, but I certainly don't know it. All right, so we're almost done cleaning this up. Now here we can go, we can close that off. Okay, cool. And then here we're going to say it also correctly identifies valid passports. Okay. And now in this case, I'm going to do pretty much the same thing. All right. Except instead of invalid, I'm going to be looking at valid. And then instead of equaling 0, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So all of those should be valid. Okay, so I think that's all there is to it. Let's do it again. 3 examples. They all passed. Amazing. And so now we can pop back into, what do we got? Our day 4 solution. Okay, and then here we can just say valid by presence. Right, and then we'll do part 2 is not by presence but by content. All right, So that's all looking good. So we can say Ruby part or day, not part 4, day 4 solution.rb. Run that. Oh, okay. So we have invalidate range, undefined method, 2i for false class. Cool, cool, cool. So how could this be happening? Let's go to day 4, right? And so what was that error again? So this is invalidate with rules. Line 53 is where the trouble starts. So what is happening here? So value, right? So we are defaulting this to false if it's not present. Which above, in the end, that's sort of the end of the story, right? If we're just looking at presence, then that's all you do. You grab it, is it present or not, right? Here, we're not specifically looking for presence, we're looking for what is it. But if it isn't present, it's going to return false here. And so here, I'm just going to say, what do we say? Return value. There's sort of, I'm trying to think of a way to say this that doesn't look terrible, because I could do things like return value unless value, which that is kind of weird. I mean, it's going to work, but it's weird. Let's just prove to ourselves that it's going to work. Oh, so undefined local variable method value for passport. And what is that? Range per unit. I'm just going to leave this as is. Let's move on to the next thing. So we're going to return value, because like another thing that we could say that is really weird is we could say return value if value equals false, which again, I don't know. None of these things are really clear to me. Let's just do return value unless value. That's sort of zen. Okay, so then what was the error that we actually ran into was validate range per unit, undefined local variable method value. So validate range per unit. So here, what do we got? What do we got? So it's interesting because I feel like the value's here. So why is it telling me, okay, here, this is the problem. That value is not defined yet. So we have an, okay, there we go. Failed to parse unit and value from 82. Interesting. So, range per unit. Our value is just 82. Okay. So, what does that tell us? Well, so I think the mistake that I made here is if I look at here, is that actually this formatting of being followed by the unit, that is actually part of the validation. I had been assuming that that will always be there and I'm really just validating the range. But no, actually, and it makes total sense, but the unit being there is actually part of that validation. So here I had been raising an error, but actually what I want to do is I want to simply return false. So I could say, if it doesn't match my beautifully crafted regular expression, then it's not in the right format. So here I can just say return false. And now, let's see, where was I running this? Here we go. Okay, there we go. Worked the first time. So now we only have 111 are valid, which that makes sense if it's less than what we had before. Okay, so that passes the gut check test. I submit it. Boom, got it right. 1 gold star closer. Okay. Well, it's 3 hours until part 5 drops, so that is all for today. I hope you have enjoyed part 4. That was 30 minutes, even shorter than yesterday. It feels like these might almost be getting easier, so I'm looking forward to when the difficulty ramps up a bit. So we will see you next time. Have a great weekend, and hope that you're following along. Definitely submit a issue or pull request. I've got my GitHub linked for the channel where I'm going to be pasting all of my solutions. If you see something I did that you think you know how to do better, let me know. All right.